Welcome to the GCSE English Language Revision Guide to Figurative Language and Imagery Techniques. Sit back, put your feet up, and enjoy the metaphorical ride where you'll literally learn a load of useful stuff about how we use language to describe the world around us. So, what is figurative language? Well, literally means using the real or original meaning of a word or phrase. And figurative language is when we say or write anything that is not meant literally. Figurative language techniques, such as similes, metaphors, personification, and symbols, are often referred to as imagery techniques. This is because we use them to create more vivid and interesting descriptions of things. Here's a list of some of the key imagery techniques that you'll be familiar with. Firstly, we have simile, when one thing is compared directly to another using like or as to create an image. Then we have metaphor, when one thing is used to describe another thing to create an interesting or unusual image. Then we have personification, when non-human things are given human qualities like thoughts and feelings. And then we have a symbol, where an object, person, thing, or color is used to represent another thing. For example, how we use red to represent anger or love. You might be surprised to know that when we say literally, we often use it incorrectly and actually mean figuratively because we're using language such as similes, metaphors, personification, or symbols. For example, you might describe yourself as literally dying from hunger, when, in reality, you might be very hungry, but you're not actually close to death. And figurative language features such as similes, metaphors, personification, and symbols are all around us. In fact, you probably use them every day without thinking. For example, the cells in our bodies react biologically in complex ways to infection. We can understand this process more easily through a metaphor of war, thinking of it in terms of fighting and invasion. So, a writer might describe how scientists believe stress affects the development of T cells, the white blood cells which help to fight off invading microorganisms. We also use a similar metaphor to describe a computer being attacked by a virus or some software not working because of a bug. Your computer hasn't literally caught the flu, and the software doesn't really have a small insect crawling about inside, but the metaphors help us understand the complex digital processes that are going on. So, how does figurative language work? Well, figurative language works because, firstly, words can reveal a theme, such as black, darkness, and night are linked to death, or red, heart, and light are linked to love. Secondly, specific words can create a particular mood, such as tension, or convey action, drama, or make the reader feel a certain way. And words can do this because they have two sets of meanings: denotations and connotations. Denotation, the dictionary definition of a word, or, in other words, the actual meaning of a word. Connotation, the ideas words and images link to, or, in other words, the meanings we associate with a word or image. Here are some examples of denotations and connotations in actions. The word desk literally denotes a table, a piece of furniture with legs and a flat top that provides a level surface, but it has connotations of work and study. They've become associated with each other because we often sit at a desk to work and study. Now, the word sky literally denotes the sky, the area above the earth in which the clouds, the sun, moon, stars, etc. can be seen. But it has connotations of heaven and freedom. They've become associated with each other like this because the sky is seen as endless and without restrictions, and it's the place we look up to when seeking heaven. Using a word pyramid like the one here allows you to break down the meanings of individual words and images. It will help you identify the connotations being conveyed and understand the ideas you or a writer is trying to express. A good way of understanding figurative language is to look at songs. This is because songwriters, like all writers, use figurative language in their work. Take a look at these examples. Firstly, we have Taylor Swift and her song Mean. And here, she sings the lyrics, "You, with your words like knives and swords, and weapons that you use against me. You, with your voice like nails on a chalkboard, calling me out when I'm wounded." Then we have the mighty One Direction, and their hit One Thing. "Shot me out of the sky, you're my kryptonite, you keep making me weak." Finally, we've got Disney's Beauty and the Beast, and the lyrics, "Ask the dishes, they can sing. They can dance. So, did you spot the figurative language techniques each of the songwriters used? Well, let's take a closer look. Firstly, Taylor Swift. She uses similes to describe words as being as hurtful as weapons and how the person's voice makes her flinch and cringe. Now she knows how I feel when I have to listen to her music. Now, with One Direction, kryptonite is the only thing that weakens Superman. And here, the boys are using a metaphor to say that the girl they're singing about is kryptonite and therefore has the same effect on them as kryptonite does on Superman. Weak. Now, you're singing All Dancing Plates. Here, personification is used to give life to crockery, making these inanimate objects sing and dance so we can see them in a different way to how we see them normally. Now, let's take a look at Big Shaq. We all know this man's not hot and he's good at quick maths, but did you know he's also pretty good at a quick metaphor or two? For example, in Man's Not Hot, he says, I'm going to spin his jaw. Now, I'm no roadman, but I'm pretty sure that, of course, he's not literally going to make this poor person's jaw spin around. That would be impossible. No, he uses spin as a metaphor to create a violent image that suggests this man will be punched extremely hard. He also says that, if she ain't on it, I ghost. Now, Big Shaq isn't literally going to leave this world and become a ghost and float through walls and spook people out. No, ghost is used here as a metaphor to suggest that he's likely to end the relationship by suddenly and without explanation stopping all communication. So, why do I need to know all this stuff about figurative language, I hear you ask? Well, aside from being able to understand how the world around you is represented by people using figurative language, you also need to know this stuff for your GCSE English exam. For example, Paper 1, questions 2 and 4. Amongst other things, it also involves you identifying imagery techniques and explaining their effect. Likewise, for Paper 2, questions 3 and 4. And you also need to be able to use figurative language in your creative writing. That's question 5 on both exams. So, now it's time to take a look at some examples of imagery techniques used in literature and non-fiction text. On the next few slides, you'll find examples of figurative language taken from a range of texts. These include a fictional prose novel, a non-fiction article, and autobiography, the sort of text you're likely to see in the exams. First up is poetry, and this is taken from Wilfred Owen's famous war poem, Dulce et decorum est. If we look at the example here, bent double, like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge. Here, the technique that Owen has used are similes, and here's a breakdown of the connotations. These similes are used to compare the experience of soldiers in World War I with that of old beggars and haggard women. The soldiers are sick, exhausted, dirty, and desperate, things we'd normally associate with vulnerable people living on the streets. So, why has Wilfred Owen done this? Well, as you can see from the pictures, it's a pretty fair comparison. The poet did this because he was determined to show people back home, by using imagery they could understand, such as beggars, that war was not a glorious experience. Now, let's take a look at figurative language used in a play, William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Here's the example. It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Rise up, beautiful sun, and kill the jealous moon. The moon is already sick and pale with grief. Here, Shakespeare has used metaphor and personification. And he's done this to describe how Romeo compares Juliet to the sun, that's the metaphor, creating the image that she is so incredibly beautiful she brings light and life to the world. This is further emphasized by the image of the moon becoming jealous and sick of her beauty, and that's the personification. So, Juliet's beauty, bringing light to Romeo's heart in the darkness of night, just like the rising sun brings light to the world. Looking at prose fiction now, and the novel To Kill a Mockingbird. Here's the example. In a fog, Jem and I watched our father take the gun and walk out into the middle of the street. He walked quickly, but I thought he moved like an underwater swimmer. Time had slowed to a nauseating crawl. Here, the writer, Harper Lee, uses a simile and personification to create the image of the narrator's senses becoming overwhelmed. The narrator feels like time is slowing down and the people moving about appear to be moving in slow motion as something dramatic is happening in the story. Of course, watching a dramatic life or death situation happening right in front of you could overwhelm your senses. Everything slows down underwater and looks and sounds strange and blurry, and this is how the narrator in To Kill a Mockingbird feels as she watches her father try and save their town from great danger. Here's an example from non-fiction text, a newspaper article. Need fire extinguishers to tick the safety box? Hire them in for the day. The lift is a death trap. Stick a sign on it to say it is out of use and the inspector will pass it by. The dark arts thrive in the inspection business. Here, the writer is using a metaphor to compare illegal and immoral business practices to the dark arts of evil, corrupt wizards and sorcerers who seek to use magic to cause harm and even death. And it's pretty obvious that cutting corners when it comes to health and safety just to save money is likely to cause serious harm or even death. So, according to the journalist, making people work in dangerous conditions like this to make more money is no different to being an evil, corrupt sorcerer like this. Now here's another non-fiction example, this time from an autobiography. I had 4th degree frostbite, the worst form. My fingers were covered in deathly black blisters, my hands freezing to the bone. The pain when it thaws is colossal, at the top of the human tolerance scale, like a huge invisible parasite with a million fangs. Here, the writer describes how they suffered from frostbite during an Arctic expedition. To convey how extreme the pain was, he uses a simile to compare it to being constantly bitten by an invisible monster that's got a million fangs in its mouth. The reader imagines how painful that would be and is then able to get an idea of how much agony the writer was in and how serious his situation was. Frostbite, even more painful than being eaten by something like this. Well, I'm afraid you've reached the end of this guide to figurative language and imagery techniques. So remember, figurative language is when we say or write anything that is not meant literally. Figurative language techniques, such as similes, metaphors, personification, and symbols, are often referred to as imagery techniques. Figurative language is used in everyday speech and in written text to help us understand the world around us and to create vivid and interesting descriptions. And finally, we can understand figurative language because we understand the connotations, the ideas and images we associate with words. Well, thanks for watching. We hope you found it useful.